I think, therefore I am. But I'm thinking all the time, and I don't know who I am. Am I? Are you? I'm in the middle of nowhere, and it's a good place to be. Welcome to Just Nowhere with Dr. Samuel Zinner. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Just Nowhere. This is Dr. Samuel Zinner in the mountain village of Aulla in Tuscany, Italy. Today we have a very special guest as Professor Lee Irwin from the College of Charleston. Welcome, Lee.
To be here.
All right, great. I learned of your work some years ago from your book, The Dream Seekers, right? It's about the vision quest among the Plains indigenous people. And you have a new dream book out. But before we go there, could you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
And relationship to dreams and dreaming.
Just yourself, or whatever you want to share.
Okay.
You know, who is this Lee Irwin we're speaking with tonight?
Well, this Lee Irwin is now retired from the College of Charleston, where I taught for 30 years in the Religious Studies Department. And my area of specialization was Native American religions. So I did a lot of exploration of Native religions and different traditions. Also, a focus on dreams, paranormal experience, and comparative worldviews in religion, with a strong interest in metaphysics and transpersonal experience. And that interest and that focus came out of the rich and complex experiences I myself had in dreaming. Dreams compelled me into research on dreams. And when I found out that Native American traditions were one of the few religious traditions that really maximized the value of dreaming and the importance of dreaming, my focus just went there. And then, of course, I did a lot of field work with Native people, and I've been to sun dances and sweat lodges and all that stuff. And really enjoyed my relationship with them, but my interest continued to grow into esotericism. So I was the vice president of the Association for Study of Esotericism, which is the only American scholarly society for esotericism. And I'm a member of the Rosicrucian Order, and I'm a member of the Sufi Order for Inyanadi Sufi teachings here in America, American Sufism under Pirzia. So I have a pretty wide background in esotericism and dreams and visions and mysticism and so on. And I published over 10 books and about 50 or 60 articles. I don't remember how many. And so now I'm retired, so now I can totally focus on what I really want to focus on with no compelling academic oversight.
Excellent, excellent. I see that your most recent book is from, Lexington, right, which is also the publisher that's dealing with the book I'm presently co-editing, right? So that's interesting. But anyway, what is the title of your new book on dreams?
Dreams Beyond Time, Sacred.
Right.
Dreams Beyond Time. I mean, it's the main title.
All right. And can you give us a brief overview before I'm going to zero in and ask you about the whale? But a brief overview of what this book is about.
Okay, so a little background there.
Sure.
I have been recording my dreams since 1968. Mm-hmm. And I now have about 700 single-space pages in my computer about all my dreams and dreaming experiences of what I've called unusual or paranormal or anomalous dreaming. Not your sort of ordinary dream, but the more interesting ones that stand out. And so I had this, and I've been developing this database, as it were, on dreaming and exceptional dreams and so on. And I wanted to always write a book about it, but the truth was it was so complicated and so challenging. I just didn't feel up to it until I finally retired and I could put my full attention on it. And so the book does a survey on dreaming background and history and my own take on those, like Jung, but what do I think about Jung and Freud, and they're just the classics. And then it gets into more modern, existential therapy and other kinds of therapy. And but it's not a book on therapy. It's really a book on the way in which dreams empower us to explore our potential that is not yet fully developed in our waking state. So the dreams is kind of like an entry into, and this is, by the way, similar to Native American. I mean,
Yes.
dreams are a means for the empowerment of the individual if they can enact, understand, and harness, so to speak, the dream significance. And and that would be fine because then I break it into dreaming types. I do ordinary dreams, I do mythic dreams, I do psychic dreams, and I do transpersonal dreams as four basic, heuristic categories, nothing too rigid there. And then I go on and explore a bunch of other types of dreams that is in the book. However, the main thrust of the book is to try to bring dreaming and metaphysics together.
Okay.
So the latter part of the book, the last half of the book is on. So here's all these dream types, and I'm particularly interested in the paranormal and the transpersonal. So what does that tell us about the nature of reality, about the nature of where dreaming is sourced rather than in the unconscious? What else can we say about that? And also how the metaphysics and ontology are core to understanding what dreaming is really about. Not unconscious influence, but ontological influence that deepens our understanding of our inmost psychic and spiritual potential, and to actualize that in relationship to what I call a pansentient cosmos.
All right.
And that requires some unpacking and discussion.
Sure. We'll get to some of that unpacking soon here, but
Okay.
before we go there, and also right discussing some of the terminology, I've read right that your book is about touching the well. So please share that anecdote. It's actually a dream that you share in the towards the beginning of the book. But since you say that's what the book is about, touching the well, fill the audience in, and then we'll go from there. Thanks.
Okay. So the dream experience is me becoming aware, becoming a lucid dream, and I'm floating in the ocean. There's no shore, there's nothing, no land in sight, and I'm just kind of floating there. And the distinction between the ocean and the sky and the stars that are sort of sprinkling through there it represents a kind of unified cosmos, and everything is alive. And and the water is warm. I can hardly tell that it's not cold or anything. It's very comfortable, very soothing, very relaxing, and extremely expansive. And then up from the depth comes this creature, which is a whale, and it's huge. I'm like very small compared to the whale. And the whale comes up, and it doesn't fully surface. It surfaces a bit near me, and I can sense it. And I reach out, and I touch the whale. And when I touch the whale, my consciousness expands radically, and I have this kind of sense of union with the cosmos and the great forces of the deep that are animating and compelling us forward to better understand our own potential and consciousness. Is extremely positive. And so dreams, to back off one step, dreams have allowed me to touch the whale, which is to touch this deeper core of being, which is extremely profound and much more complex and cosmological than what I comprehend. I comprehend a certain amount, but there's a lot more I don't comprehend.
Sure, we all know less. How to say it right? What we do know, right, is minuscule compared to what we do not know. I think
Yeah,
that's
that's
the
right.
case for all of us. Well, I've had Max Velmans on this show before, and so immediately your dream brings to mind his metaphor of the iceberg, uh,
Mm,
right?
right.
And so, for those who aren't familiar with that, he basically is talking about the tip of the iceberg above the waters, right? Is representing our consciousness, or at least our ego, and everything beneath that, right, is concealed. And there are different terms that different experts use for that, unconscious, subconscious, and we'll be talking about those terms in a bit here. But Velmans has this interesting way of expressing these waters. He has written that those waters that support the tip of the iceberg above the waters, this is the universe, right? And so it's really a difficult concept, right, to integrate adequately, I believe, right, because by definition that is not at least directly accessible to us, right, at least not as easily as the experience that's accessible to our ego, right. But anyway, so what occurs to me now, let's get right to a question I think a lot of readers are going to have with your book, and that is how you deal with the word unconscious, right? So this is one of the standard terms. Carl Jung uses it, right? Famously, he used that instead of Freud's subconscious, because Jung, I believe, experienced this word sub as somewhat pejorative. And well, yeah, in Freud it sort of is, isn't it? The subconscious has a lot of pejorative associations. But Jung then decides, he believes that this word unconscious, right, has a more positive valence. But now in your book, you sort of have a negative reaction to this term unconscious as the source of dreams. So can you sort of fill us in on why you have this negative feelings about unconscious, and what's your more positive alternative to that?
Okay. So, so let me go back to your iceberg metaphor for a minute.
All right.
And let me say something about that
All right.
maybe metaphorically helps to explain my point of view. And that is the thing to remember about the iceberg metaphor, which I think most people sort of forget, is that the iceberg is made out of the ocean water. There is no difference between the ocean and the iceberg except the state. So if you can move beyond the state of frozenness and enter into the more dynamic core, which is the living water of the planet, which supports all the life forms and everything that's in it, it's us. It's our fundamental makeup psychically that we are attuned to that deeper water. And like the dream we talked about, the whale, I mean, it's kind of like the magnitude of the ocean in relationship to the contraction of the individual has a tendency to thoroughly psychologize the psyche as an individual entity. No, I don't see that. I see us as, and I have to bring the word soul in here because
Sure.
otherwise it doesn't quite work. The soul, insofar as we are ensouled beings, I see that as an openness to the deep waters of being, not the unconscious, of being itself. And the unconscious becomes just a layer, if I could put it that way, within the structure of the psyche. But let's say for a minute that the unconscious is transparent. Let's imagine that the influences that are impacting the unconscious, so-called, are really ontological influences coming out of the deep ocean itself, the currents, the tempo, the activity that's going on down there, of which we are not very well aware. And so so the unconscious for me becomes a kind of reductio. It's just too contracted of an idea, and it is built on a premise that everything that we experience kind of goes into the unconscious. Well, I don't see evidence of that strongly enough to really embrace that idea. So I'm not going to say there's no unconscious. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it's a zone, so to speak, of awareness that actually influences us, but I would contrast it to hyperconscious. Now, the hyperconscious is, let's go up into the atmosphere for a minute,
All right.
because the air that the air contributes to the formation of the iceberg, right? I mean, cold
Right.
air makes it freeze. Okay, so the air is influencing the in not a very visible way, the conscious mind. So I call that hyperconscious. So now we can talk about the influence of the stars, the cosmos, using the so-called upper metaphor as compared to the lower metaphor. But the thing is, the upper and the lower conform to one giant cosmos,
Right.
right? So we're intermediary, and my interest in the paranormal is that I believe it evidences quite strongly the hyperconscious dimensions that we actually inhabit and share with each other on a global scale. So my picture of the person and personhood, it was too contracted to keep it into a psychological model. It had to go to an ontological model, and I can work with the concept of the unconscious, the subconscious. However, I
Sure.
do have a slight bias there, which I always think of the subconscious or unconscious. I use the word subconscious more than unconscious.
All
The
right.
subconscious is more of the past. And hyperconsciousness, I believe, though there's no real evidence to prove this, okay? But I
Right.
do believe that it's future oriented more. There's a tendency toward what's coming in and being assimilated hasn't yet become actualized and existential. So it's forthcoming. Whereas that subconscious influence is more like what we've been through and what we've lived through and how it shapes our current mentality. So we have to bring these two into relationship with each other. And spiritual growth to me is integrating both the hyperconscious and the subconscious into what I'll call a more superconscious state.
All right.
I'll
Yeah.
stop.
All right. Yeah, that's a lot to think about, and I suspect that a lot of people will process your ideas and realize that if they have different ways of formulating these same concepts, is probably to a degree a matter of semantics. All right, and we can probably get to the same place. For instance, I think it's quite obvious if one wants to take a larger view, as you said, then right the above and the below are going to coincide. Right, we're going to see at a certain point this is sort of an artificial distinction, or a pedagogical tool that's useful. Right,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
useful, especially for our daily life. Right, we got to be able to be somewhere at a certain time. Right, but from a larger perspective, those distinctions sort of fade away. And so I've always struggled with this, talking about the like higher consciousness and then the lower consciousness or the unconscious. For me, also seem to, and this is I think semantics, but they seem to like coincide at one point, because I think if I'm understanding them correctly, when you look at different mystical traditions, which talk about what has been called, let's say, higher awareness, higher states of consciousness. Think of it this way. How can I explain this? Well, there's a saying attributed to Jesus, that the people, the infants who are at their mother's breasts, right? That's what a person has to be like to enter the kingdom, right? This Jewish idea of the kingdom of God. And so when I think of that, as best as I can think of it, I mean, that's probably something for Christians to interpret instead of me, but it seems to be that what's being hinted at is is there's an emotional relationship between the infant and the mother, right? Because
Okay.
the infant who is at the stage of drinking milk has an emotional bond. The ego is really not yet fully formed, of course, and so the cognitive abilities are right in at the infant state, and so this is sort of we could call it a lower state, right, of cognitive abilities, a lower state of consciousness, and yet that is where a person has to be to achieve this entrance, right, to this grand spiritual state, which Judaism calls the kingdom of God. But so then that also then I think coincides. That's a good example, I think, of where the lower and the higher sort of like collapse into each other. I mean, we could either metaphor works depending on what one wants to emphasize, right? And so I went through all of that just to clarify, right, for the audience especially, that these issues are a matter of semantics, I think. And so if you hear someone emphasizing the higher states of consciousness, and you have a reaction that, right, well, we need the lower states of consciousness. This is all a matter of semantics, maybe, right? So forgive the excursus there, because in essence, I agree with what you're saying, and I appreciate your concepts and your book because it challenges me. And I appreciate that because the older I get, right, the more difficult it is to be challenged, as you say. So it's helping me to expand my own thinking because, right, for instance, the book I'm co-editing, right, the introductory chapter is by Noam Chomsky, so we're writing about the origins of language, and that, of course, is really deep, right, deeply imbricated in the question of consciousness. Right, and so according to Chomsky, we have our ego, right, and we have our ability to speak, but he emphasizes that the main function of language is not to communicate, is to think, right, but even when we think silently, this is not the inward state of language. The inward state of language is what most people would call, right, the unconscious. It's inaccessible to us. And I think that's where the real interesting stuff is going on. And to call it unconscious has always sort of troubled me because, and all right, I have a question for you on this, right? How would you respond to me on this one? We think of the unconscious, and yet that's where everything is going on. And so if you could get into the unconscious, wouldn't it be fully conscious? You see,
Okay, there's
right.
a lot going on there. Let me just say.
All right.
Okay, so let me think about this for just a moment here. So let me say this. First of all, I believe that language, and here I think we're going to part company.
That's
I think
fine.
yeah, I know. I think language is a necessary, useful tool that we absolutely need and clearly have developed in many different cultures and so on. However, my ontological interests tell me that this kind of perceptions that I'm interested mostly in are translingual. So language isn't going to get me there. And I mean, I'm a thinker, and I've been thinking a lot about a lot of stuff. Okay, and it only goes to a certain. Can only acquire a certain amount of insight through thought in terms of the very dependence on lingual structure. However, and this is a crucial point, my dreams and my intense engagement with those dreams has revealed clearly to me that there's a whole, I won't call it conceptual, but there's a whole cognitive realm of experience that does not need language to access or to experience. And I don't really agree that the unconscious is where everything's happening. I think some of the stuff is happening there. some of it's happening consciously, and some of it's happening hyperconsciously. Your intuitions about what's going to happen before it happens, kind of thing, is not unconscious as far as I'm concerned. That's
All right.
we're in a different framework there, and
Mhm.
so a lot of my writing has tried to break free of the conceptual limitations of a lingual description. And in
Mhm.
fact, I really say in this book and others, I can't really describe what I'm experiencing, but I'll make an attempt, and that'll be my best.
Mhm.
You know, it's like an artist. I do my painting, and that's an expression, and it has to be good enough. But you know what? It's not the reality. It's an
Mhm.
image of the reality. Same thing for the words in a way, you know.
Understood.
And
Uh,
so I come back to something else you said. You didn't answer a question about the significance of the intellect in the metaphor of the mother and the child. I don't see that. You say it's, it's not developed. That's true, but ironically, that's what I would call an unconscious relationship.
mhm.
And so, yeah, the mother and child.
Sure.
But I want it to be hyperconscious. And that requires me to cultivate cognitive ability and to
All right.
study and dive into Buddhist philosophy and Taoism and other Christianity, Judaism,
Sure.
whatever,
Sure. Sure.
to gain insights that I myself haven't gotten, in order to get to a point where I can cultivate a worldview, an intellectual and spiritual worldview that isn't dependent on the intellect, but is absolutely using the intellect in terms of scaffolding, so to speak, to
Mhm.
get to these higher vistas of experience,
Mhm.
or lower vistas of experience. Either
Mhm.
one doesn't really
Right.
matter.
Right.
And in doing that, I find dreams to be a completely ignored, basically, medium, which people don't pay much attention to. And yet, it's right there. From my point of view, the most creative activity in your mental life and my mental life is our dreams. They're
Right. It
amazing.
does. It does seem to be right. This really, really major component, right, of human cognition, and it's usually not thought of in that way.
Right.
But back to the infant and the mother. Again, it's one struggles because of semantics and different backgrounds. Another way that I like to think about that particular parable is what it is really, is that the infant, right, is well, if we think of the adult as the infant, because that's what's going on there, it's a parable for adults and what they should be like. And so, one of the messages in that perhaps might be that it's it's right to get to the translingual, to get beyond, right, the limited intellect. And for instance, right, when we look at a particularly low magnitude star at night, right, we have to look at it, right, in the periphery because of the structure of our eyes. If we try to look at it directly, it fades from our vision. So we have to look at it to the side with our peripheral vision. So,
Okay.
right. So now if we look at that cognitively, right, there are some concepts, or not concepts, but there's some truths that if we try to grapple with them directly, we can't. And so we have to
Okay.
like let go,
Okay.
relax, and
Hmm.
then the answer comes, right?
Okay. Right.
And so some of those truths we can talk about them not directly. We have to try to get to them through stories, parables, indirect ways, right?
Right.
And not through the binary system, right, that we're usually functioning with.
Right.
It's like beyond that. So
Yeah.
the translingual, actually, I agree with you wholeheartedly there. And what I was trying to challenge you on was in order to help me get where you're at, because I think that you have a very important insight in this new book when you're taking to task the usual notion of the unconscious. And that's what I was trying to get at when I was saying, well, if we got into what most people consider the unconscious, wouldn't that really be fully alive and aware. So it's really, I think what I'm saying is I actually agree with you. What we're calling the unconscious is really something that is what, in your words, it's really the hyperconscious, right?
Right.
It's not unconscious. And so if we think about, and here's what's become known as a Dr. Zinner question. Uh, if we think about autistic savants, for instance, some of them can hear, for instance, Rachmaninoff's a Rachmaninoff piano concerto. They've never heard it. They hear it once, they can instantly play it with utter
Okay.
perfection. Or
Okay.
there are those who can, without having memorized it, can recite over the first more than the first 22,000 digits of pi, right?
Hmm. Right.
And so we usually think, well, they're somehow accessing this data from their unconscious, right?
Hmm.
That's how psychologists and psychiatrists
Right.
usually
Right.
describe this. But does that really make that much sense?
No.
Isn't it? Right. All right. So how would you describe this? Are they getting that data directly from like a hyper state of consciousness? Their abilities are just at a higher level than the rest of us. Let's just put it that way.
Well, that it's okay, but that's very complicated because what we
All right.
haven't discussed is the nature of hyperconscious awareness. There's a feature here that we're not addressing in terms of our relations to other people. So
All right.
we have to bring in the theme of intersubjectivity.
All right.
Okay, so I don't believe that the unconscious or the conscious or the hyperconscious is an individual function. It's a shared function.
Yes.
My ideas, you and I are well, okay. You and I right now are sharing ideas. Okay, so it's intersubjective. We're exploring possibilities and understanding. Well, I think that happens unconsciously and hyperconsciously. So how big, just to use a metaphor, how big is the we say the collective unconscious or the collective hyperconscious. Okay, I'm not going to put any barriers up there. I'm not going to say it's XYZ. I'm going to say it's an open horizon and it's a vast horizon. And some people have a capacity to attune to information that's in the hyperconscious zone and channel it in ways that others can't simply do. But that doesn't mean that they might be able to play Rachmaninoff, but they may not be able to make supper. So
Right.
it's
That's the
so
drawback.
so it's like, okay, so they have a unique profile, a certain psychic ability through means that we don't really understand that well. And for me, they're in tuning to what I'll call the information field. Okay, I think the information field is global, and I really, honestly, believe it's cosmic. And so, your mentality, I would see in the dream book, I make a sharp distinction between content and states.
Mhm.
See, we're talking a lot about content, but we are not talking about states. And I'm saying that someone who has that autistic savant ability is in a unique state to access that content. Well,
All
that
right.
happens in dreaming too. You can have unique states that allow you to experience transpersonal, paranormal, and other types of awareness with that totally effortlessly. It doesn't require you to do anything just to be aware. And in this case, the dreaming opens the door for perceiving and receiving information. I believe partly through the internet connection of our psychic relationships, the way in which we're psychically connected. They have a bunch of studies now on dreaming together, people that share the same dream. Okay,
Yes.
that's right there. That's part of the hyper network of shared consciousness. Now you can say, wait a minute, isn't that unconscious? Yes. It is unconscious because we're not at the level of awareness that allows us to access, in a more hyperconscious sense, that information. Why? Because we live in a little box.
Hmm.
We don't really have an expansive view on reality that accommodates the actual nature of the information field, which is vast. And I mean, it could extend out into the galactic plane, you know?
Sure.
There's no reason to draw a line there somewhere. The line we draw is the line of our own limitations and our own beliefs. That's
Mhm.
what keeps us you know, it can keep you centered and make you functional and make you success in life, but it doesn't mean you're really open to the full panorama of what's available unconsciously. So what happens there is the hyperconscious and the conscious and the unconscious become part of a single field.
Mhm.
And what determines your awareness within that field is your degree of development and spiritual integration to be able to expand into that greater hyper reality.
Yes, makes sense. I recall Max Vellman's when he asked me the question, right? Have you ever had the sensation that someone was staring at you and you turned around? He says that's
Hmm.
a good example of how our our awareness and whatever we want to call it, right? The unconscious and then the ego, all of this. But anyway, it's just not an individual phenomenon,
Right.
right? It's and that would explain, right, how we can have that kind of experience. We're not conscious of the I mean, not through our vision, right?
Right.
That
Right.
someone is staring at us. We turn around, but sure enough, someone is there. They're staring at us. And how can we know that? Well, I think we know it because of what you said is actually correct. That is, this is not something that is actually individual, or at least it doesn't stop there, right?
No, it's
So
shared. Right.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
shared. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Of course, I think that most people at some point in their life are going to have what we call a precognitive dream
Right.
or other types of odd dreams where they do have
Mhm.
this knowledge that seems, impossible according to normal standards. And so the way I have thought about it was, well, whatever the dream world or the dream state is accessing, perhaps somewhere down there or up there, right, is
Right.
all knowledge, right?
Right.
Past, present, and future. And
Right.
so in that state, somehow, right, one can access, right, a few pages ahead in the story,
Right.
right, or back. And it's
Mhm.
interesting how you describe it. You're correlating or suggesting a link between the unconscious and the past, and then the what is the hyperconsciousness and the
Future.
future,
Yeah.
right? And so if we now want to integrate it all, right, we can say that right, this information state that you referred to, it's all there, right? Past,
All
present,
there.
and future. It's all there. So well, all right. Let's get to dreams here before too much time slips away from us. Right, the fact that dreams, right, are I think a major component of the phenomenon of human cognition. All right, so the answer may be obvious, but why don't we usually think about that fact?
Okay.
Right, we don't we relegate dreams, as, especially as scientific thinkers or scholars. If we deal with consciousness, dreams are not the thing that we usually want to concentrate. We think that it's really not all that important to understand human cognition, but clearly this can't be the case.
No. Yeah. The problem is, of course, is that dreams aren't controllable. You can't just say, "Oh, well, let's pull it out and take a look and analyze it and try to understand it." No,
Right.
dreaming is subjective and intersubjective and unpredictable, slightly chaotic, incredibly innovative and creative, and it can't be pinned down and put on a slide under a microphone. I mean, under a telescope or whatever.
Microscope.
Yeah, microscope. Thank you. And so it's like, okay, so it reminds me of a conversation I once had with a professor in psychology, head of his
Mhm.
department. He was hiring someone, and I asked him, "Oh, look, this is a great opportunity to hire somebody on consciousness." He said to me, "Oh no, we would never hire anybody on conscious." Head of the psychology department. I said, "Why?" He said, "It's too complicated. We can't understand it." So we're going to do science. Oh, what's that? Oh, brain studies. Okay, we can measure it. So yeah, dreams don't make it in the scientific materialist paradigm that dominates culturally. However, in other cultures like Native American and other primary cultures and other places like Tibetan Buddhism and other places, dreams are extremely important and considered to be a means for accessing altered states and higher states and insights and so on and so forth. And their index, I guess is the word I would use, it indexes our degree of self-awareness. Now, most people don't want to pursue the challenge of understanding and trying to integrate dreaming experience because, yes, it does take a lot of work. And you really have to study your dreams. I've studied my dreams for over 50 years before I wrote that book. And that's because I found the subject extremely challenging. And so the process view forced me into a question. And here's my question. What is the cause of the dream? Okay, that's a huge question. It is not, in my opinion, the unconscious per se. I'm not saying the unconscious doesn't play a role, but I wanted to go deeper because I had these anomalous transpersonal dreams that were totally not part of my quote unquote unconscious or subconscious, and yet I was having them regularly and quite often and very powerfully. And it just dawned on me that, well, what if the cause of dreams is ontological? What if the knowledge base that exists cosmically is pressing on us, if I could put it that way, to wake up to our deeper potential? And what medium might they use, or not they, but it, use to facilitate that kind of awareness? Dreams. It's a perfect medium for infiltrating, as it were, the human daily consciousness and use it psychically as a goad, so to speak, to ask deeper and more profound questions about the nature of consciousness and its causality and what stimulates and causes us to grow in certain kinds of ways. I need information. I need experience. I need insight that is based on real lived encounter. And so these transpersonal dreams became a medium for reflection on the ontological origin of dreaming. And that's what I meant when I said, imagine the unconscious is transparent. It's not a zone that, it's like I said, the iceberg and the water are really made of the same thing in different states. So if you can access that deeper influence, call it through the unconscious or hyperconscious, doesn't really matter, just so that you become conscious of and remember the dream, because you have an ability, or I have an ability, to shift our states. We have to be, that's the one thing I learned. It's not the content, it's the state. You have to be able to get into that state. It's like, and I'm a lifelong practitioner of meditation, and I understand states in terms of my own meditation practice. So it's like, get into the state, be receptive to that state, like the child at the breast. I mean, to be open to the state, and there's a transparency there, and let it flow in, but don't try to determine it. This is why I say in lucid dreaming, do not direct your dreams. Let them direct you. They will guide you to things you can't even imagine or think of. And so it's like, I try to cultivate that state of openness and receptivity to what's possible beyond my limited cognitive framework.
How do you think about dreams now when we jump to the level of everything, the cosmic level, right? I recall, right, reading the Upanishads some years ago, and encountering this idea that, to paraphrase it, like the universe is God's dream, right? This kind of trope, which we find, quite commonly in different mystical traditions. I know in Judaism, right, we have this trope as well, right? Especially Kabbalah. A lot of the traditional Kabbalists have this concept that, there's something dreamlike, right, to this existence, isn't there? And so when you talk about, you use the term pan-sentience. How do you draw a correlation between the dream state and the universe as such?
I do, for sure. Yeah. And the reason, okay, so this is the metaphysics question, right? Really, I mean, the reason, okay, we have to go back to causality. Okay, and I've tried to make it clear that for me, the dreaming experience causally is not just individual, and it's not just intersubjective, but it's also ontological. All three are at work. And so this ontological influence is an influence that flows, so to speak, through the entire structure of the cosmos, from my point of view, in terms of the idea of pansentience. And pansentience is not about soul, okay? It's about sentience. It's not panpsychic, it's pansentient. Right. And pansentient means what I'll call the minimal response. I'm just going to describe it briefly. The minimal response for me is three fundamentals: attraction, repulsion, indifference. That's it. That to me defines sentience. You're attracted to it, you're repelled by it, or you don't care about it. Okay, it's so simple, right? So at the atomic level, some structures are attracted to each other, some are repelled, some are indifferent. It goes right down to string theory. It goes down to, gluons and quarks and so on. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, that's a fundamental state of nature, and I'm calling it sentient. Mm-hmm. Okay, and I don't see it as self-consciousness or self-awareness or anything like that. Okay. However, if you combine pansentience with complexity theory, you can make a very simple statement, which is, and as sentience combines, shifts, grows into more and more complex forms, consciousness begins to become more and more obvious until at a certain point, and I don't know where that point is, but at a certain point, self-consciousness tends to dawn, and then you get into being self-aware and sentient, but it's pretty far up the ladder, so to speak, of complexity. Not evolution, complexity. So the more complex, so we're pretty complex. So our complexity allows us to be self-conscious in a pansentient way, and we go beyond attraction, repulsion, and indifference, hopefully. Mm-hmm. And we develop whole complexes of emotional and cognitive complex responses to the world. Okay, so back to dreams. So dreaming, it seems to me, is a medium that allows us to experience a creative, innovative response that bubbles up, so to speak, from the pansentient depths through the processes of complexity to allow us to explore alternatives and options that we might not think of in our limited conscious thinking process. And so we have to make one more step.
All right.
The God question. Mm-hmm. So is sentience, pansentience, complexity, consciousness linked to a totality that represents something like God? Though I don't use the word God. I don't prefer it. I think it's too small of a concept for most people's minds, including mine. All right. I prefer something less theocentric. And so when I call it super existent being. I believe that it is a super existent cosmos. So that means that there's purpose and intention behind the scene, and that intelligence is not a random factor. Intelligence is a purposeful consequence of pansentient development and increasing complexity. And in the future, I believe we'll become more intelligent slowly through many phases of struggle and resistance. to respond, to attract, to be repelled, and so on. And so the dreaming medium sort of represents the free state, if I can put it there. It's conditional, but I mean it's freer than the ordinary cognitive processes and presents us with alternatives. And I believe it's through the super existent influence working its way through into the dreaming experience that is provoking us, if I can put it that way, to wake up and to become more aware and more conscious of the cosmos, not of our psyche and not of our relationships per se, but all that's good. But also the cosmos as a whole is not materially determined, though it's materially functional. And so it is a belief that I have that dreams are provoked by that more superconscious awareness that works with us in a very individual kind of personalized way that allows us to access innovative and creative potential. Now that's what I call the metaphysics of discovery. Rather than say a metaphysics of ontological principles, A, B, C, D, I'd rather say, no, it's what we're discovering. It's like what we started off when we started this interview. What we don't know. It's what we don't know, what we're discovering. So in the metaphysics of discovery, dreaming is a real medium for the exploration of possibilities. It doesn't mean you have to follow them out, but you can learn from them without any doubt. And you learn from them in complement to your normal intellectual awareness. And it's an integrative task. I'll stop there.
Right. Well, that's very illuminating. Actually, I don't find any point in there with which I would disagree. I mean, it's really a coherent system. Perhaps one final thought here.
Okay.
That is, this I've had this discussion with many scholars in many different fields, but especially with physicists, mathematicians, when we get to the subject of complexity, which you mentioned, right? And this is why I'm bringing this up, right? So we start with sentience, and that I really like what you're saying there. That's exactly my model, and right, because if we have something that is having a reaction, right? We know we're there, and that's the most fundamental level, right? And so consciousness is much further past that, but even at the state of, let's say, at the level of gluons, right? So you can have two gluons, they interact with one, or one can interact with two, and then those begin to build amalgamations, right? And so then we get to the complexity, right? And eventually, right, we get to clumps of matter and everything else. We got a whole universe, right? Out of this sentience, right? And so that makes eminent sense. But when we're looking at this, right, there are different ways that these interactions can take place. Now let's just look at the gluons, right? So one can interact with two or vice versa, and then different permutations, right? So now we're into math, right? The different possible ways of these combinations, are producing the amalgamations. All right, so now where I'm getting at here is randomness and order.
Okay.
Right, so I believe that most people sanely, right, have this intuition that the universe, despite the tragedy and all of this, there seems to be some purpose, there seems to be some order to it.
Right.
So now how does this order function together with the chaos? And so of course the analogy in the dreams, of course, is that I think most people's dreams, I can only speak for myself and what I've read of others, right? And that is that there is this interplay between things that seem very chaotic to us, and then, but if we take a larger view, right, for instance, at a series of dreams, we begin to see that there's some kind of order inherent, and it's emerging to us. We're becoming aware of this larger order that, if it's right in our face, right, a single dream, we can't see it. But as we gain perspective, we begin to see it. Right. So is the randomness really random, or is it merely our lack of perspective? Right. So if we could see
Right.
the randomness from a larger viewpoint, it turns out to be order. Uh,
I
do you
don't,
have
but
any thoughts on that?
yeah, uh, I'm going to always have thoughts on something. So,
And that's
um,
why you're here. That's why I'm
yeah.
talking with you.
So, um, yeah, I mean, first of all, I would like to escape the dialectic.
All right.
Okay, so I wouldn't want to say order and disorder or
All right.
order and chaos. I want to break that up and make it a little more complex
All
and
right.
say and how I would do that was to say, well, let's think about creativity. Okay? Well,
Hmm.
creativity and the whole idea of the metaphysic of discovery is to live a creative life. And to seek out creative ways to explore and expand our abilities and awareness. So I would tend to say that yes, and I'm perfectly comfortable with the theory of chaos. No problem. I like chaos.
Sure.
And chaos strikes me as not well understood, but I do think that chaos reflects a creative potential. So I want to put creativity into this discussion and say, well, it may appear chaotic, but it's not because it's necessarily ordered, but maybe it's because we have to make it ordered. We have
Oh,
to creatively embrace, I had a dream and it was really weird and strange and I really didn't comprehend it. That happened to me a lot. But I wouldn't say, "Oh, I'm missing the message of the dream." See, that's the old school.
mhm.
No, the more existential approach is to say, "Okay, the dream reflects my current state, and it's giving me messages to think about. And can I draw out of the analogies of the dream meaningful constructs that will move me forward in terms of my understanding? Something I'm not seeing, something I'm overlooking or overemphasizing or underemphasizing. Okay, those are my choices. So
Mhm.
I want to say that the existential commitment to the encounter with chaos has to do with your moral values, your intellectual tendencies, your training, your background, your education, all that plays into the role of helping you shape and access and also to assimilate the chaotic awareness to discover a greater unity and meaningfulness behind that random sort of chaotic in presentation. Now, ontologically, I have to say, I don't know how you feel about this, but ontologically, I would have to say, yeah, behind the scene of our chaotic lives, there is an inherent unity. There is a deep, profound cosmological harmony, and we're living in relationship to it, but we are not living through it. We're relating to it, and at times everything flows into sync, and there's a real flow, and everything is good. Other times we're out of sync, and so on.
Mhm.
So while I say creativity, I want to confirm that what lies behind the chaotic encounter is a creative possibility to reach a new harmonization, a new integration, a new understanding. And it can collapse. That's happened to me many times. I've gone, aha, I understand. And then about, 3 months later, it's like, wait a minute, kind of,
All right.
fell apart, and I have to go back and redo that again. And then I thought, you know what? That's the creative process. You construct, you deconstruct, you keep working, you keep growing, you keep developing. So
Right.
so I see creative impulse through the chaotic is very normal and very healthy, actually. Now you don't want to be controlled by the chaotic.
Mhm.
That's a different issue. You don't want to be taken over by it. You got
Mhm.
to keep your center and be interactive and be healthy minded. Otherwise, it actually can lead to serious problems.
Sure, 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 sure. Psychologically viewed,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah,
Well, right. So sometimes I think of randomness as sort of right, it's the carrier of the order. Right. So you have an intelligible sequence, right? Let's say, RNA or DNA, but the intelligible sequence, right, is embedded in this, right, all this randomness. So
Yeah.
it's as if that randomness is actually, right, the necessary background, right,
Mhm.
from which the order arises, right? And you know, and so you can't have an explanatory gap. So you got to say, where does the order come from? Well, then maybe it's inherent in the disorder, right? There has to be some ontological continuity. But
Yeah.
right, so be that as it may, again, as I said, the reason I bring order and randomness up is that they both seem to really be features of dream states and of
Yeah.
actual dreams, right?
Absolutely.
Right, and how to integrate both of them together, right, I guess is really an art.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm very grateful to you, Lee, for this new work that you've done because, as I said, it's challenged me, it's helped me grow my own understanding, and I hope that by studying it further, I'm going to learn more. And so, I appreciate your work, and
Well,
I
thank you.
congratulate you on your new book. And I thank you so much for joining us here.
Okay. I
All
enjoyed
right.
our conversation.
All right. So take care, and everybody else, we'll see you next time around.
If you enjoyed the program, please consider supporting this channel with a donation through Patreon or PayPal. And don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.